Elmer had some pretty elaborate gags he had to pull off in the film, so part of the fun was sitting down with Gabe Bartalos and figuring out where his techniques would end and I would have to take over with stop motion animation or some other kind of puppet trick. The most obvious one was Elmer hiding in Brian's mouth on the subway, because there was really no way to do that live whatsoever. And because compositing was a bit of an issue expense-wise, the only way I could figure out to do it with was basically doing stop motion animation, lining it up to a projection of the background on the subway, and shooting it not with motion picture film, but with still photographs, and animating Elmer for each successive still photograph. And what I wound up doing was, with an X-Acto knife, cutting Elmer out on every single one of those frames and gluing it to a piece of animation cell that I lined up with Brian's mouth on the background footage. This poor little rotted guy is all that's left of the Elmer stop motion model. He's a little stiff. I can't really move him anymore, but this is the model that actually did the brain eating in the junkyard and leapt off the toilet stall to attack the guy sitting on the pot. Actually, the inner foam is a cold foam, which was a two-part mixture, and this actually stays flexible for a while. The outer foam, however, is more of a baked foam rubber, and that, because it is a latex product, latex is a protein and just will not last forever. It basically has a shelf life, and eventually it just deteriorates and falls apart. The electricity that was kind of cascading all over the brain, they shot the brain sections first and edited them together, which wasn't really difficult. It was basically just an insert shot of a calf brain that they bought at a deli. And I would sit in my little room, just draw these weird little electrical lines on it. I got so bored drawing these little squiggly lines that I started saying, what if I put some subliminal things in there? I would draw a letter in one spot for successive frames, and I would spell out words. Frank had written some sequences that were potentially kind of expensive. They were critical to the script, so my job basically came out to be to figure out how to do them to look good and be cost effective. Frank wanted the theme of the movie to be something with bright lights. One of the little tricks that unfortunately had to go by the wayside was an effect Frank wanted as Brian is running through the auto junkyard. You'll see him in the film leaving his hand on various cars as he's running through. The idea was originally that Frank wanted to have glowing handprints wherever Brian touched, again to go with the light theme that followed throughout the film. And unfortunately, that was one of those things that was just a little beyond our budget at the time. One of the effects that didn't quite come off as planned was a trick earlier in the movie when Brian is first juiced by Elmer, and he looks up at his ceiling light to see that it's turning into an eyeball. I built a gigantic rig for this thing, about 3.5 feet wide, where it was plexiglass on one side and stretchy dental rubber on the other side, and basically it was like a rear projection unit. I made a miniature eyeball out of some little fiberglass pieces that I made for the iris that progressively got more and more eyeball looking. And I put those on a piece of white paper, threw some feathered out red yarn around it, covered the whole thing with KY jelly, took slides of that, rear projected that into this device I made, and then filled it up with compressed air while we were shooting so that the entire rubber front of this rig blew out into a big eyeball shape. But unfortunately, from the angle we needed to see it at, which was Brian's point of view, you didn't really see the distortion that was necessary, so the wavy eye wound up getting done optically instead. What you see in the film is still the slides that I shot, but the distortion effect at the very end of the sequence is no longer the eye coming down at the camera. You basically just see a little ripple as Brian's viewing it below the waterline. Basically everything you see in that movie is the first take out of the camera, because there was very little time to go back and do any retakes. This is a miniature I built for the climax of the movie where Brian blows his head off and these crazy light beams come shooting out of an apartment window. it seemed the easiest way to do this at the time was to basically just build a miniature. And I wound up going to a dollhouse supply store in New York City, picking up all these little devices and slapping them together on a piece of wood I found on the set, and standing behind it with a slide projector in a room full of smoke and just kind of just waving it around while the camera rolled automatically. This was only the second movie I'd ever worked on, and the first one kind of fell apart because they tried to do too much with too little money. And I was bound and determined that was not going to happen again. So I tried to stay on top of the details and at least make sure that we got everything complete in a satisfactory manner. It was a good experience. We all really supported each other and pulled for this stuff. In retrospect, I wish we had a little more money. I wish we could have refined the effects a little bit more, because there's a few things that I look at in the film that I go like, oh God, I wish I could have done that one again. But it's low budget filmmaking. We were very ambitious. We tried to get the stuff on the screen, and hopefully for the most part we succeeded.